Welcome everyone to the special meeting of council on Monday, June 24th. Tonight we're going to be doing the project kickoff for the zoning bylaw update. Roll call. We're all here except the deputy mayor is absent with notice. Motion that the special meeting of council agenda be approved as circulated. Councillor Wilsey, sent by Councillor Brennan. All in favor? Carried. Are there any declaration of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Motion that we receive the report. Councillor Kennis, sent by Councillor Palmer. All in favor? Carried. With that, Director Huff, I'm going to turn it over to you or let you lead us through it.
Thank you, Worship. So tonight I'm actually just going to pass it on to our two consultants from J.L. Richards who have been hired to complete this project for us, Laura Lee Spencer and Allison Bucking. So I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, we're very pleased to be here in person to present this to you today. So we'll start with the slideshow and then we'll kind of move into an explanation component, and we'll save time at the end so we can kind of wrap up any loose ends so we can address them for you appropriately. So if we can move to the next slide, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Oh, just so I can be clear, I'm Laura Lee and this is Allison. Sorry, I didn't define the difference between the two of us, so I apologize. So we're going to go through 4 stages of the agenda today. So we're going to do general planning 101 on why we're here, what needs to be done, and the objectives of a zoning bylaw and a zoning bylaw review. We're going to walk through what we've done with the project thus far. We're going to talk about that background review and findings based on staff feedback, and we're going to, as I said, wrap it up with having conversation, and anything further that goes forward, you're more than available to have a conversation with us by email after this meeting is over. So we can go to the next slide, please. Our team is comprised of Allison and myself, but we also have Jason Farragon, who is our principal lead, and we also have Rebecca Elphick, who assists us with the project as a whole, where we need be. So that would be us going forward. So to talk about the Planning Act, essentially we want to get into what that looks like, why we're here, what a zoning bylaw does. So we're governed by 3 documents, as you know, the Planning Act, the PPS, and any other provincial level legislation. This is all high level review. You're also guided by the upper tier official plan of Middlesex County. And then from there, you work into your own official plan, and there the implementing document ultimately becomes your zoning bylaw itself. So those are the type of land uses that essentially state where buildings can be located, how big those buildings can be, in terms of setbacks, road frontage, etc. All governs what starts in the OP at the upper tier government level to your official plan and to the zoning bylaw, which is an implementing document. Just to be clear, the County of Middlesex official plan, when you move into your Strathroy-Caradoc official plan, you're only allowed to be as permissive but not more permissive than the overriding document. We can move to the next slide from here. So what is an official plan? It's a policy document that lays out essentially what you can do and where certain land uses can be located throughout the municipality. In that regard, certain rural uses are permitted based on the ability for those rural uses to be completed based on lot size, agricultural uses in the same way based on what we call minimum distance separation, which we can explain in further detail as we get through the document. Looking for what type of density that's going to be permitted into certain areas of your settlement areas. And that's the overriding principle of what an official plan achieves. So again, you go to your Middlesex official plan and then to the Strathroy-Caradoc official plan. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. So as I said previously, essentially this particular visual represents it the best. It defines and shows you front yard, rear yard, height of building, etc. Percentage that is required to be landscaped, all of those components based on what the zoning states and where that particular property is located. That's what a zoning bylaw does. It takes all of the policies at the high level and it moves into the implementation stage where you actually have enforceable components that dictate what that land use can look like. We can move to the next slide. Why do you need to update the zoning bylaw? You're required, based on the provincial policy statement and under the Planning Act, to update and be in accordance with every piece of legislation that's above you. So in order, at one point in time, you do your official plan update, you need to bring your zoning bylaw review into conformance based on the Planning Act and the requirements. It's also helpful to determine if there's any issues, update the housekeeping components. If you find that there's an issue that's coming before you in terms of a minor variance on a regular occasion, this is the opportunity to address why that would be and what we can do to fix it to prevent overuse of resources that aren't applicable at the time. That's generally what the zoning bylaw review requires. We can speak to that further if you have further questions in that regard, but I think this speaks for itself and why you would get into that component. You can go to the next slide.
So as many of you may be aware, the municipal's official plan amendment 14 was appealed, and therefore there are a number of sections of that official plan that are not in full force and effect, and therefore we're proposing to split the comprehensive zoning bylaw review into 2 stages. So stage 1 would deal with Planning Act and planning practice changes. So those are things related to, like, let's say, additional residential units, and then policies in the municipal official plan that are in full force and effect, and then any housekeeping changes to the zoning bylaw that have been brought up by staff or others. And this is the stage 1 is why we're here today, the purpose of the background report that we presented, and it is anticipated to be completed later this year or early next year. Stage 2 will cover the policies of the municipal official plan that are under appeal, and is anticipated that will commence after the appeals have been or are almost resolved, and will likely commence in 2025. Next slide, please. So we're proposing to undertake the stage 1 of the comprehensive zoning bylaw review in 3 phases. So phase 1 is where we are right now, is the background review. So we've conducted and reviewed the background materials. We're seeking input from municipal and agency stakeholders, and we are going to host our initial public engagement activities. So we'll be hosting the public information session on July 10th in the evening, and then we'll also be hosting a survey on the municipal website shortly. Phase 2 will commence in the summer, and that will consist of preparing the draft bylaw, getting more input from municipal and agency stakeholders, and also continued public engagement, so that includes a public open house. Then we'll move into phase 3, which will likely happen later in the fall, which will consist of preparing the final bylaw, continued public engagement, so that will be the statutory public meeting, and then we'll present the final bylaw and the amendment to council for decision on adoption. So as part of our review, there's a number of background studies and materials that form the basis of our work, which included the Strathroy-Caradoc official plan, the Middlesex County official plan, the strategic plan, the downtown Strathroy master plan, the North Meadows secondary plan, urban design guidelines. We also took a look at the transportation master plan and the employment land study as well. And so those documents are reviewed in that background report. Next slide, please. So the background report itself covers a number of topics, and I will briefly explain each topic in a moment. However, for the purpose of this presentation and in the interest of time, we'll be covering 4 main focus areas in more detail in this presentation. So if there are any topics you would like further addressed or anything you'd like to discuss in more detail, please feel free to ask this question at the end of the meeting, or alternatively, you can send us an email. You can send an email to myself, Laura Lee, or Jennifer Huff, and we'd be happy to discuss that further with you. In terms of the topics, we've looked at additional residential units. The Planning Act now no longer, requires that additional residential units up to 2 are permitted in urban areas. We took a look at home occupations and home industry. We took a look at the regulations governing farm help dwellings. We looked at short-term accommodations. We looked at parking and access, childcare centers, setbacks and separation distances, so ensuring that there's sufficient separation between industry and more sensitive uses like residential and schools. We looked at regulations for renewable energy systems, right sizing accessory buildings, took a look at on-farm diversified uses, shipping containers, and we also reviewed the zones and standards within the zoning bylaw itself. Next slide, please. So residential zones and standards. So we're recommending to introduce permissions to allow up to 2 additional residential units within the urban area wherever single, detached, semi-detached, or townhouse dwellings are permitted. We're also recommending regulations regarding parking and walkway access to those units. The regulations would allow up to 1 additional residential unit to be located in a detached structure. We're also looking to introduce regulations for additional residential units within the rural area to allow up to 1, subject to specific criteria such as servicing, compliance with minimum distance separation. In addition, we're looking to expand permissions for short-term accommodations, really to reflect recent trends. So currently the bylaw speaks to bed and breakfast accommodations only, and we are hoping to introduce permissions for a range of short-term accommodations, including Airbnbs. And really the purpose of introducing regulations is to ensure that they're governed by the zoning bylaw, and this is including maximums for, let's say, occupant load, regulations where they can be located. We are also looking to expand permissions for residential uses within the urban residential zone. So in acknowledgement that the province of Ontario is currently experiencing a housing crisis, we're looking to introduce a greater diversity of housing types, just depending on the density of each of those zones. So that will be things such as introducing multi-unit residential within your first density zone, and then appropriate townhouses in your second density zone, things like that.
So we can move to the next slide, please. So we've reviewed agricultural zones and standards. So what we're looking at is providing a little bit more flexibility for on-farm diversified uses, provided we're still taking into consideration the regulations related to minimum distance separation and OMAFRA. So we're permitting maximum building lot size and types of those uses and putting some limitations upon them, which has been discussed in the report. So we've reviewed that entirely. There's new agricultural zones. So previously in the past, when there was a residence that was severed as a surplus farm dwelling, there was a different zone. What we've done is combined that into one zone to provide some further clarity that a second residential dwelling unit would not be permitted on the area left behind by the surplus farm dwelling severance itself, to provide a little bit more clarity and provide future planning decisions to be guided in a consistent manner. We've also looked at the introduction to permit small-scale renewable energy projects, considering them to be an on-farm diversified use to provide some further flexibility in that regard. And there's also the considerations for farmhouse dwellings, lots of which has been guided upon based on our own experience in that regard, dealing with places like Leamington, and just ensuring that the maximum number of employees and those components are all in accordance, obviously need to be with the building code, but also providing a consistent approach. So when those applications come forward, council's comfortable to making the same decision and applying the same regard every time an application is received and considered. So we can move to the next slide, please. So we've also gone through and reviewed commercial and industrial zones and standards, again, really considering that we can apply a consistent approach for applications as they are received, and consistent approach for any alterations to existing components that are there within those 2 zones. So we've also considered where to permit large-scale renewable energy as of right projects that can be occurring in those types of zones that reduce those restrictions and regulations that may have otherwise been required with the current format of the bylaw itself. We've also looked at the minimum separation distance between industrial uses and those residential or sensitive land uses so that we can be consistent again in that regard and avoid those potential land use conflicts where you have industrial uses that may be in proximity to an institutional or residential use. In general, we've gone through the general provisions entirely based on staff comments predominantly. We've also provided some consistency in that regard. So those general provisions are the first part of the bylaw that you see every time you open it up. It provides like guidance for everything that would apply to all zones or restrictions and prohibited uses to some zones and areas or prohibited uses in general. So those have been reviewed and updated to be more consistent with the general approach that's strategically taken throughout the province in general. Again, that's just to provide the consistency that the bylaw needs to be so that you're updating it in an appropriate manner so there's no confusion and putting yourself into a position where someone could challenge the document. We've also added up some new components in that general provision related to bicycle parking, a little bit more of an eco-friendly approach in addition to the requirements for electric vehicles, etc., and parking requirements to reflect current AODA requirements in general. So that's a general overview of everything that we've done, but I'm sure there's lots of questions. So I will turn it over to Jennifer, and then if you want to just leave it with me, we can answer any questions. Thank you.
Sorry. Ready for questions, all right?
Yep. That's
Council, we'll open it up for questions. Who wants to start? Councilor Brennan.
Through the chair to our director who can redirect it if she wishes. Is it a fair statement to say that many of the changes that are being made, especially with regard to residential zones and standards, are a necessary reaction to changes in provincial policy and provincial legislation?
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. It is fair to say there's been very recent changes, as you know, with Bill 185. So those are being reflected as part of this. So updates will be consistent with the documents coming out in specific additional residential units and the requirements related to what that Planning Act will now say and this legislative regulation. So it's fair. That's a fair comment.
Yeah. Follow up, Councilor Brennan.
Just a follow-up comment then for anyone who's watching, that the municipality is not arbitrarily imposing these changes on our municipality. This is a necessary step in keeping in alignment with provincial policies.
Yeah. Councilor Wilsey.
Just as a question, for the other attachment that's there for the report, are we going to be going through that and asking questions on it, or are we just supposed to pick and choose and scroll through it?
No, I think we're just on this one now, Councilor. Just on
Okay,
this
so
presentation we just were given.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything, Councilor Pelkman.
So sorry, just to clarify, then the discussion paper, well, if we have, because I've got 3 pages of stuff here.
Yeah. That'll be after they talk about that.
Okay.
Any other questions, Councilor Wilsey?
Just one on the Airbnb and the short-term rentals. I guess I was a little bit surprised that we're looking at implementing that and expanding it to it, because most places that I'm talking about, like there's entire buildings in Toronto where they're all Airbnb and they're not being rented out, and if we're trying to increase housing, why would we want to allow that in more places? I guess if I could get some comment on that, because I don't think that's where we want to go.
And I'll echo Councilor Wilsey's. I had the same question, Councilor, that it's purported to add to the housing shortage crisis, so I had the same question.
Through your worship, we're proposing to introduce regulations for short-term accommodations because the bylaw currently does not have any regulations, so there's nothing governing Airbnbs or other short-term accommodations within the municipality. So by introducing regulations, we can set standards in which Airbnbs can be implemented in the municipality.
Councilor Wilsey.
Just as a follow-up, the language was to extend it to other residential zonings where it's not currently allowed. So I guess that was the point where I had, because we talked about expanding it to R3 and R5, where it's not currently allowed. So I guess that's probably where we don't want it the most, is in the small places.
Yep, just comment. Any other questions? Councilor Kennis.
Not sure whether this is an appropriate question or not, but I guess when it comes to changes within areas that are already developed, but you may be looking to add units to a particular area, do do you look at the infrastructure that's there in making assessments of how zoning should change, or is that like a, is that totally separate? I guess I'm just concerned because it's come up a few times that, if you add a whole bunch of units to places where there were previously single dwellings, can your infrastructure deal with adding all those new units, and do you take that into account when looking at proposed zoning changes? So I hope that question makes sense. Or
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, your worship. That's a typical evaluation that needs to occur as part of a capacity evaluation report for the entire municipality that's on services of any kind. Public services, not private services. So that would be a review, and as part of the zoning bylaw amendment process, if someone was applying for those types of uses through an amendment process to permit them, that would be a review that staff would undertake to understand if there's capacity in the system to support that. Second to that, if it's an as of right, that would be at a building permit review stage. So the chief building official ultimately has to review and determine what that looks like in terms of capacity on a first come, first served basis.
I'll ask my question, because I think you may know agriculture's our #1 industry, so you can expect a lot of questions regarding the farm help dwellings, migrant workers here in this area. And so you can expect a lot of questions. I would hope, Director, there'll be a lot of engagement with our farmers and those that use the migrant workers, but you can certainly expect a lot of questions when it comes to that. So, any other questions? Seeing none. Director Hoffman, were you going to go through the discussion paper, or did you want to delve into that or speak to that? Because I know councillors do have a lot of questions specifically on the discussion paper.
Thank you, Worship. I think we would be receptive to receiving questions on the discussion paper at this time. Thanks.
Okay. So we'll open up. I think you go over your 3 pages, Councillor Malton.
I'm going to start with 3.1.2.5, the rural special policy area, specifically regarding the Strathroy Gateway and Hickory Drive. So I believe
Sorry, could you just repeat the section number again, just so we're all on the same page?
3.1.2.5. So I believe it says that it would you would want to zone it as a rural residential. However, in the discussions that we've had about placing new industrial land, that land is the closest to the 402 Cloverleaf, and so that farmland that's in behind those 7 or 8 houses there, to me, is probably the cheapest potential industrial land to service. Running the services from their terminus at Metcalf Street, probably only less than a kilometer to that property. So I don't agree that should be rural residential only. I think we need to open that land as potential for industrial land.
Councillor Wilsey, then we'll catch up with you.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that same one when we were talking about special policy and putting industrial. I think we need to do a lot more across all of our intersections. There's 2 other ones that aren't in Strathroy, which have land that could be used for dry industrial as well. There's other corridors we should look at, Park House, Glendon, and Longwoods, that could also be prime and would have access to the 402. As a municipality, we need to definitely increase our commercial and employment lands so that we can remain viable. So I think this special policy should actually be expanded to a few more areas, and maybe have a separate one for industrial.
Do you have more on your list there, Councillor?
Yep. In 3.2.1.1, suppose I should open it up so I can remember what the heck it is. It says that there are discrepancies, and I wondered if you could explain what those discrepancies are.
Through you, Your Worship, I can speak to that. So the discrepancies relate to the permitted residential uses. So in the low-density residential designation in the North Meadow Secondary Plan, it permits a range of uses. So it permits singles, semis, duplex, triplex, and fourplex dwellings, whereas the current zoning bylaw only permits singles. Within the medium-density residential designation, it permits a wider range of uses, including townhouses and low-rise apartments, whereas the current bylaw does not permit those uses.
All right, also in that section, it said lands adjacent to the 402 up to 1,000 meters would require a noise impact study. Does anybody know how far Second Street is from the 402? Because I'm gonna guess that's within a kilometer, and if that's the case, I would suggest that we need to change that. It's not within 1,000 meters?
It's about 900 meters from Second Street up to the line. We used to run it for cross-country.
Yeah.
And then you've got the fields beyond that, so it's well over a kilometer.
Good, okay. I have a number of questions or comments about parking. Primarily, I know we currently only allow driveways that are 20 feet wide. I think if, well, not if we allow, because we have to allow extra units, I think we need to revisit the allowable width of driveways, and particularly the use of rollover curbs so that people can expand their driveways. Because I think one of the things we need to do is that as people start making these applications, we need to make sure that there's enough off-street parking to handle some of these places. And if we're moving to 1 car per unit, you know, I can think of lots of places in town where there's single width car driveways and a sidewalk where you can only fit 1 car in the driveway. And if somebody pops another unit in there and they already have 2 cars, you know, we start having to start widening the driveways. So, and I had a question about the EV parking. So, if we're required in a mandate to have EV parking, who's paying for the electricity for that? Would they be units like a vending machine? Or would we be required to provide the power for that? I'm not sure if anybody knows that answer, but I have a kind of an issue of us popping in EV stations all over the place and then paying for the power so that people who are buying more expensive cars who can probably afford the power are taking the juice for free. So it's just one comment I have.
Yep, sorry.
Sorry, I think we have an answer to
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just looking there for a hand there.
If I may, through you, Your Worship,
The particular standard for EV parking is related to a self-serve station. It's really up to what you require to be installed, whether or not that hydro would be paid for by the user or by the municipality. Typically, it's a user pay station.
Okay. I don't have an EV car, so I don't know how it works.
That's what our current stations are. So the ones that we already own, you pay to use them. So the ones out in the back here and the 13 that we have in the community are all user pay.
I'm gonna move around and we'll
Yeah,
circle
sure.
back to you. I see some other hands. Councilor Brennan.
Just to follow up, because I had been thinking about the same thing with parking as Councillor Pelt, but I guess my question to staff would be our stormwater plan and additional wide driveways throughout town. I'm just wondering where we are with that. We're looking at our stormwater plan. If we start doubling driveways all over town, I'm just wondering what that does to our stormwater plan. It's not an answer I need a question I need an answer to right now. I just see that it's something that's going to come back later on when we're looking at our stormwater plan. We're saying, okay, well, what are we going to do? Well, we don't know how many people are going to be entitled to double or triple their driveways over the next 25 years. Our stormwater plan, we're working on it. I'd like to know what the potential impact is there. And that's just a question at this point. Thank you. Doesn't need an answer right now.
Any other questions? I have one and I'm gonna ask, and I'm gonna admit that probably as a municipality, we may be a day late, but to me, it's glaring we don't have a Mount Bridges plan. I think it's becoming apparent since I've been mayor and listening to people that there needs to be a plan, specific plan for Mount Bridges. I know we have one North Meadows, and we talk about the downtown area of Strathroy, and I don't know if it could be rolled into here, Director, but it just, I don't know if it would make any difference on this project if we asked for something specific to Mount Bridges, or if that's an entirely different project. And feel free to tell me it's an entirely different project, but it's become apparent to me in the last little while that I think, the Ward 2 councilors would agree that we need some type of Mount Bridges specific plan. So I'll just open up a door there and I'll let you walk through it.
Thank you, Your Worship. So maybe to back up a bit, when you spoke about how the fact that we have a downtown plan and we have a North Meadows plan, so that was completed as part of an official plan project. And so those were special projects that were developed for a specific area. And what I can say is certainly when we updated the most recent version of the official plan, we did look at Mount Bridges and wanting to maintain that the village character of Mount Bridges in the policies that we had. So if there's a desire by council to do something more than that, I would think it's at a policy level. So this is a little lower than that high-level policy review that needs to happen. And if that's the direction of council, then it wouldn't be necessarily as part of this project, although certainly we would craft some zoning, perhaps some zoning that is a little unique in Mount Bridges for that village character area compared to some of the zoning in other locations. But beyond that, really, it would be a special policy project to develop something that was unique in Mount Bridges.
Okay, got it. Any other questions? Councillor Derbyshire.
Thank you. I'll turn this on through you to the director or somebody over there. For the holding provisions on 4.4 where they talk about the archaeological hold that we could possibly come up with and then create a thing. It says we don't really have any kind of control or anything, but I do believe that this is already a step in the process when land is going to be developed, that they do have to have someone come out and do an archaeological assessment. Am I wrong?
If I may, through you, Your Worship, that is true, but it depends on the type of development. So there's no provision currently at this point in time that would require someone with an existing lot of record, for example, to have an archaeological study completed. It is becoming more and more predominant. If someone's doing a plan of subdivision, that would be a required submission that they would have to have. If not just a stage 1, they may need to move to a stage 2, 3, or 4. And that happens, but when it's a standalone existing lot of record, there's no provision that requires for that to be completed.
Go ahead, Councillor.
So, like if I want to build a home out on my farm, this is what this will then put a hold pattern until I get an archaeological study done? Is this what we're saying here?
In part, yes, through you, Your Worship, my apologies. In part, that is what it's saying. In addition, though, however, there are other parameters and control measures. So oftentimes, the holding provision can be lifted in the absence of an archaeological study based on recognition of understanding, First Nations and their components and their review and the likelihood of an archaeological substance being located on the property. So that's one method with which to not impose this for every property, but it's also a method with which to have that secondary review.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Okay, so then when they talk about if we were to put this in, now we talk about getting ourselves the Ministry of Citizenship and the multiculturalism to identify a mapping data to show these areas. So this isn't going to be on a kind of case-by-case basis. Essentially what we want to do then is set up areas that are deemed archaeologically sensitive, and now they will be looked into regardless what goes on in them.
Go ahead.
Through you, Your Worship, that's correct. So that data, as much as that data is available, In often circumstances, you'll see that along shorelines in particular, these are areas that are significantly of interest. Other properties where they've been significantly altered in the past, there's not so much of a concern, but that mapping data will be crucial to establish what that looks like and would end up being a schedule to the zoning bylaw.
Any other, Councillor Hippel?
Thank you. Through yourself to Director Huff and Redirect. 4.3.5, the child care centers. So we've got a lot of schools and we've got a fair amount of child care centers, whether they're at home, like through someone's house or not, or in a business setting. So I know you had said it should be considered, but at the same, so the kiss and ride and the drop-off lanes. For the schools, not all the schools have that. And I'm assuming the school board has something, like they have to work with the municipalities' zoning bylaws to be able to put that into place. The reason I'm asking you this is because there is a school that is actually going through this as we speak. They're wanting to change the parents that are coming in and should be just dropping off their children but are not. And then they end up with cars on the road, and it's a very dangerous practice because kids are crossing the road, and it's a busy road. And I know that we're looking at childcare centers, but I guess my question is, when you're looking at a childcare center, this is us, but when we're looking at the school zones, it has to be with the school board as well. Is that correct? That's my first question.
Through you, Your Worship. So the zoning bylaw isn't retroactive, so existing properties with existing uses, unless they go to alter that use, this would not be retroactive toward them. If they were to build a new school, for example, requirements and provisions in the zoning bylaw would need to be adhered to, but this doesn't retroactively go back to an existing property unless they alter the property itself for some reason.
Okay, thank you. I needed that that's answered my question for that. The childcare centers, though, you did say at the end, I think it was in the third paragraph, that usually children that are going to childcare centers are quite young, and you can't just, kick them out and say, love you, see ya, hope you get into the center. So when you're putting such bylaws into effect, I mean, you take that into consideration, right? Because it would be a little dangerous if we all of a sudden decided to do that in all of them in our area. Has this been done? Especially because I know in Toronto it's quite large, but in our area we're not. So I'm assuming that we have a little leeway there. Is that right? I'm seeing Jennifer nod her head, so.
Through you, Your Worship. Currently, we're not recommending that we include those kiss and ride or drop-off lanes for childcare centers for that exact reason.
Yeah.
Due to the age.
Thank you.
Or Councillor Peltman, did you have?
I did, thank you. So section 4.3.3 with the accessory building size. I know at the Committee of Adjustment we constantly see the accessory building size come up as an issue, and I always feel that it's a bit weird that we include the attached garage as part of an accessory structure when you read the zoning or the wording, it's about the secondary building looking secondary to the house, and yet on a two-car garage on a medium-sized house, that's a significant portion of the structure. So almost a 10 by 10 garden shed becomes too much accessory building space. So would it be possible, or is there anything restricting us from including an attached garage as the size of the original structure so that an accessory structure looks secondary to the previously built building?
Through you, Your Worship, there's absolutely no reason why that can't be included, and it would be a definition of clarification that needs to be updated in the zoning bylaw so that there's no question whether the attached garage is part of the structure itself or an accessory structure. So that's an update that can occur through the definitions.
Okay, good, because I think that would help a lot of people out. In section 4.3.8, actually, sorry, on that same issue, because the height is always a part of that as well. A lot of people are building those accessory structures to house RVs or trailers that have a little more height. So it would seem to me that whatever height restrictions we would impose should include those, because ultimately, if people start parking their trailers and stuff in a structure, it looks cleaner than having them parked all over the place outside. Section 4.3.8 with the industrial setbacks. So I was looking at class 3 specifically, and I'm thinking of one industry in town that's right up against the tracks, close to the dog park. That would have residential on the other side of the tracks. And so I'm wondering if the 300 meter poses a problem for a plan of subdivision that's already approved.
Through you, your worship, just to clarify, is the plan of subdivision already in place?
I believe so, but there may be a triangle of it that's not. Specifically the section that's closest to where Carroll Street crosses the tracks.
Okay. So typically, when reviewing land use compatibility, through our planning applications, we look at something called the D6 guidelines, which determines setbacks to those different industrial uses. And so the zoning bylaw, we're recommending that we're implementing those standards in the bylaw. However, it's not retroactive. So if the application is already approved, we can't go back and force them to adhere to those setbacks.
I just gonna ask a couple of questions there, Councillor, and I may ask, we got a lit to email, but I just want to talk about the methodology to go back, because I just want to understand what the public engagement and stakeholder engagement looks like, because that's an important component. And then second part is, who are the stakeholders that you will speak to? So I'm more about the methodology of the project.
Through the worship, so Laura Lee and I will both respond to aspects of that. So certainly the stakeholders to date that have been invited, obviously we have a number of technical agencies that we circulate all of our applications on. So that's one group. We've also had consultations with First Nations groups in the area, as well as we have a list that we have compiled through the various projects that we have, so whether it's our OP as well as the list of stakeholders that were invited as part of the strategic plan. So we have a long list of developers, community groups, farmers. We have industry professionals, manufacturers, a whole list of people that have been provided an email updating them of this project and the various components of opportunities to participate in the project at this point in time.
Okay.
If I missed anything?
Yep.
Through you, your worship, in addition, let's be clear that this document is in draft form, and there'll be plenty of, this is the kickoff essentially of the project itself, so there'll be many opportunities for members of the public to be engaged and provide their opinions. So this isn't the final document, and without having all of the comments in place at this point in time, we're not in a position to kind of comment further, but we are having the public open house, and that will be coming up very shortly, which would give public the opportunity to respond, and if they're not able to attend in person, they're more than welcome to provide their comments at any point in time at this stage.
Okay. And a follow-up, you answered my question, Director, about First Nations consultation. I just want to ask, I know, I believe it's a duty on zoning applications, or they have to, but is it a mandatory that we consult with our First Nations neighbors as part of this project?
Yes, it is.
It is? Okay, thank you. Answer my question. Councillor Wilsey.
I have a few. I did email my list in earlier, so I just got a few that I
Go
kind of
ahead.
wanted to discuss here. One easy one that is the bicycle parking on page, sorry, my page numbers are the ones that are written on the bottom of the pages, not the PDF document. So it's just bicycle parking on page 33 of the PDF. And my only comment there is that if we're putting space forward, I want to make sure that if we're putting a space aside, it's similar to what we're starting to see happen in Toronto and London, where not only are we setting aside bicycle parking, but we're also putting in security around it and room for walls, because people are stealing the bicycles from those bicycle parking. And if we're just going to put room and say lock them up here, they're just all going to be gone. So if we're putting room there, we need to make sure that that room is enough to secure them, keep them out of sight, and protect people's property. We have to be thinking of that if that's where we're going forward. On page 39, I want to talk about greenhouses and just the maximum number of people for temporary foreign workers. The bylaw here limits up to 40, but with doing some consulting with some of my clients, I've got a number of clients in my professional life down in Leamington who own a lot of greenhouses, and typically they need somewhere between 2.5 and 3 temporary foreign workers per acre of greenhouse under glass. If we're going to limit that to 40 people on a farm, they're either going to have to buy multiple farms, which isn't going to make them economically viable to come to Strathroy-Caradoc, or they're going to have to take up our housing in town and bus them in, which we have some people already doing, or they're going to limit their greenhouses to, say, 10 acres or 12 acres on a 100-acre parcel, which is not acceptable either, because they can cover up to 40% of their land by provincial standard. So I've got one greenhouse grower who is already in Strathroy-Caradoc. He was telling me his future plans are to put 62 acres of glass on 150 acres. So for that, he's going to need 180 to 200 foreign workers on that property. He's either going to have to buy 5 farms to house them, or rent multiple houses, almost apartment buildings in town that we can't rent to somebody else for his foreign workers. So I'm proposing that under this we put a secondary section for a greenhouse where we, if it's classified as a greenhouse, make sure they go through the MOE for the enhanced septic beds, make sure they're serviced either by town or private wells. Everything needs to be there. Leamington has a very good guideline for that, but I think we need to make sure that that's not a stumbling block for people who want to build greenhouses here, because the more I'm talking to them, they're worried about biosecurity. They need to be farther away from other greenhouses. And actually coming to Strathroy-Caradoc is more valuable than Leamington because we cool down at night, so their cost to run during 4 months of the year are actually lower because they don't have to cool their greenhouses at night to keep their plants growing. So there's a lot of things there, but we need to be permissible and make sure that we can get them here. And that's one of the easiest ways that I think we could get our tax base leveled out and get it away from our residential. Any questions or comments on that, on my thoughts there, from anyone?
If I may, through you, Your Worship. In my work during the Leamington boarding house study, best practices will be applied here. So you've made a very valid point. So we'll make sure that we emulate the documentation that's occurred in the past. So very well aware of the work that was put into that project. So happy to take your concerns and take a review of the documentation thus far as we implement this into an actual working document.
Okay, perfect, thank you. The next one is I wanted to take a look at some of the contractor yards. I know they've come to council a couple times just because we don't want to use our highly valuable commercial area and employment lands in town inside the boundaries as contractor yards. We also know there's a number of contractor yards that are on agricultural property and rural residential property just because that's where they work and that's where those people have their livelihood. I'm not thinking I want those people to move, but I do think that that's not a residential use and we should have a class that would allow them to do that, to expand, to not be afoul of it, and potentially even pay tax based on their commercial use rather than their residential use for part of the property. I don't know if that would be an M4 or what zoning that would be, but I'm just wondering if there is some sort of zoning we could look at for contractor yards or businesses in the rural area that are not necessarily agriculture related. Construction or warehousing and storage, things that don't need a lot of, and this again would get us more employment lands without having to expand our services. Is there a way we could put some sort of zoning in place for that?
Through you, Your Worship, the industrial zones, I believe the M1 and M2, they permit contractor yards already. Contractor yards can be permitted. So I'm just looking at my notes here. I took a look.
And I guess my clarification on that is there's contractor yards that are on agriculture or rural residential property that aren't in the settlement boundary. So if I'm remembering right, I thought the M1 and M2 had to be on fully serviced, and these are on partially serviced or privately serviced lots. And I guess that's the discrepancy I'm looking at, so that we can get that rectified properly, so that we're treating everybody fairly and letting them grow.
Yeah, that's correct. Within the agricultural zone, based on the new official plan, we are looking to, or the official plan limits uses within the agricultural area to primarily agricultural and agricultural related uses. So when we're looking at implementing permitted uses within the zoning bylaw in the rural area and areas that are not on municipal services, we have to be mindful of that, so we can look into that further. But that's just a point of clarification.
Does any other councillors have any other questions? Councillor Palco will take one more from then.
I have two.
Okay, that's awesome.
One is really short.
I have one short one. Okay.
In section 4.3.9 with the shipping containers, this is just maybe a recommendation of approach. I don't really like the idea of changing where we allow shipping containers, because somebody could say, oh, you know, someone's living in that, and they're really not. But I wondered if you create a section for alternative housing formats like you suggested, that maybe there in an application for an alternative format housing, you could recommend, or shipping containers could be considered, rather than just looking at it, you know, somebody has one lot and could put a shipping container there and call it a house. The short one I had was the public utility zones. Just wondering how the sewage pumping station would fit in, that we would have to declare it a separate zone. Like I'm thinking of the pumping station on Park Street is situated between two houses. And so I'm just kind of curious how that, do we have to make a zone for that? Or can it just be allowed to be anywhere? Because the pumping station to me is something that's a necessary piece of engineering for some pieces of land to be designed.
Through you, Your Worship. So in public utilities, essentially, they don't need to be rezoned. They're permitted as of right. So if it was a county facility or municipal facility, it doesn't require a special zone in particular. They're just permitted as of right.
Okay. Councillor Wilsey.
So before I ask my question, I actually just want to ask, because I have more, and I believe Councillor Pelkman has some more as well. If we're not bringing them up in this meeting and we're not discussing them, where are we going to talk about them before the next draft? I guess that's my question before I ask my last one.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and I think we had heard we can email them, correct? So email them through to director, they will get moved along.
Okay. And then my last one was just on C3, which is on C3 zoning, which is page 59 of the PDF or 66 if you're scrolling through it. The question I had was on the professional office being permitted in the C3 zone, which I think is great. But the caveat is the issue that I have with it, it's not permitted on the ground floor. And what I'm thinking about that is a professional office. If we have people who have disabilities or say a doctor's office or a real estate office, but they're not allowed on the ground floor of those areas, I don't like that policy. I think that was discriminatory. I think we should be able to allow offices on the main floor. Just if we're not letting that happen, but that's maybe a doctor's office does not get there, or somebody who is, I'm thinking of my in-laws and other parents and grandparents who have mobility issues. We don't want them to have to use stairs or an elevator just because we're not allowing a professional office on the main floor of a building.
Director, yep, sorry, Tim.
Thank you. Through you to Councillor Wilsey. One thing to note in the C3 zone, clinics, which would be medical offices, are permitted on the main floor as of right today. So that the permission that was being discussed as professional offices like an engineer or an accountant. Your point is made, though, if somebody wanted to go and see their accountant, that they would have to use an elevator to get to that second floor. It certainly makes sense. What we're looking at in a neighborhood designation or neighborhood zone is more of those active uses at the ground floor and sort of quieter uses above, but certainly makes sense what you're saying, and we can take a look at that part. I don't know if the rest of the team wants to say more, but I did note that clinic piece earlier, so I wanted to just note that part.
Councilor Derbyshire.
Sorry, I'm just gonna ask one question about the process here, and I'm gonna say through you to whoever wants to answer it. Do we get a chance to tweak this, or are we just kind of getting told this is what's coming through? Like, I guess I was unclear as to, after I read all this and spent a considerable amount of time going through this, I thought this was where council was going to tweak some of this with, here's the recommendations, and then we would go through it and kind of, as council, jockey through what these new recommendations are. But I feel like it doesn't feel like that's what this is. It feels like we're getting told, here's what's being shoved at you. It's all gonna make it here, and at some point you'll have a chance to possibly tweak this or do something with it, but I'm not too sure when, and if it's not now and we aren't gonna go through this, I feel like we're just gonna end up with so much stuff at some point that it's going to be so hard to decipher through everything we get that we won't end up actually working through this document the way we should probably be working through it. Unless we have no say on it and it just goes the way it goes, then we might as well just get presented with an end product.
No, I think we do it, this is a first start, but I don't know if somebody else wants to take, but we will get ample opportunity, Councillor, to, this is just a kickoff to the project, so I don't know if somebody down there wants to answer it in better language than I can, so.
Through your worship. So this is just the first stage. So ultimately, at the end of the day, this is why the document is still in draft. So this is for discussion purposes to start and kick off the process in general. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when the final product is provided, it will be the will of council that determines whether that product is satisfactory to council itself. But anytime through this process, we won't be putting a draft forward for the zoning bylaw itself until the fall. So there's more than ample opportunity for comments to be provided to either one of us, and we're very happy to answer any questions you have. This is not the final document by any shape.
Yep, go ahead, Councillor, then Councillor Pammer.
Sorry, I do believe to make changes though, it has to be the will of council.
Yes.
So I cannot just send in, hey, I don't like A4 getting removed and I don't like this and I don't like that, and it be changed. So that's where I say, like, at some point we have to have a discussion, and I don't think we should wait until it's a final product and then we just say either yes or no to the whole product. Like, if we're doing this and spending money to do this, then let's build on it all the way along. Like, if there's stuff that we as a council say right now can agree on, we don't like this and we don't like this and we don't like this, then I don't know why we aren't kind of doing this all the way along, as opposed to waiting till the end, dissecting it as a whole, and either saying, yes, it's good, or no, it's not, and then it's done. And maybe I'm wrong, but like, I know I can't email you and say, please remove 4.4.3, that doesn't work.
Councillor Pammer, then maybe we'll let the CEO answer, because I know Councillor Pammer's had her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I wouldn't be ready tonight to do any of that because we haven't heard from the community. We haven't heard from stakeholders, and I think that it's really important, at least from my perspective. I certainly don't understand the ramifications of a lot of this in a lot of areas, industrial or agricultural being two that come to mind, and I'm sure there's a lot more, that, you know, the stakeholders and the people who are living this and planning this, in addition to the professional staff, I want to hear from them so that we are looking at the full picture. And then when we've heard from all the stakeholders, then I think as a council, we can come together and discuss it and make some decisions. But I look forward to hearing more from the community and the different groups that this will affect.
Do you have some CAO?
If I can, I know Director Huff wanted to say, if you wanted to say something first, and then I'm happy to follow up afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you, Worship. Actually, Councillor Hammer had said what I was going to say is really, this being the kickoff meeting, we're here to present a draft, to get some comments from council in general on this, but really the next step is that important step of going out to the stakeholders, holding the meeting where we meet with people in person. That's July 10th at the Caradoc Community Center, as well as the public survey that is going to be available on our website very soon, as well as just having us open to receiving comments from the public and the stakeholders, because this is a document that has to be through the Planning Act, a document that is presented to the public and receives public input as well. for the process. And so then after we hear and collect all of the things that we've heard, both from council, either tonight or by email separately, from the stakeholders, from the members of the public through the survey or in person or by emails, then that's when consultants will do their magic and kind of put it together, and from their professional opinion come forward with a further draft that again will be available for public review at an open house and a statutory public meeting. And that's where, you know, if council wishes to go by line, that would be the will of council, and it would be your opportunity to really put a stamp on this document.
Any other, Councillor Hippel?
Just a quick one, through yourself, and I mean, it's not specifically about this, it's about our, the open house on the 10th. Will we be able, if there are council members or any of us that aren't able to be there, is there a way that you'll be able to put together a list of their issues and concerns and questions and things like that that would be important for us to hear? I mean, it's not like we can get a video of it, but like if we could have kind of a put together piece of that, is that a possibility? I know that's a lot of work. I was just, even something is like general for us in certain areas of the bylaws.
Through your worship, we'll be preparing a summary report to summarize public engagement and the feedback we receive.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, I had mentioned this earlier, I think I feel free saying it publicly now. This was a well-written document. It was easy for someone like me to read and follow. So thank you for that. We look forward to future meetings and legible documents. So that is really good. Reminder to council that our next meeting is on next Tuesday, on July 2nd, on 6 p.m. Consideration of bylaws. We have one bylaw to pass this evening.
Thank you, Chair. Bylaw number 6024 is to confirm the proceedings of this evening's special meeting of council. Bylaw 6024, the recommendation is that it receive first, second, and third and final reading.
Motion that bylaw number 60-24 receive first, second, third, and final reading. Councillor Kennis, second by Councillor Pelkman. All in favor? Opposed, if any, carried. Motion to adjourn at 7:02 p.m. Councillor Kennis, second by Councillor Pelkman. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.